Welcome back to the Warehouse Podcast, everyone. My name is Elijah. I am here today to continue this series that we've been running through, going position by position, previewing the 2025 Orioles. Today, I have the distinct pleasure of going through our first baseman. Um, this is a position that, I think the Orioles have one of the most unique setups in the game, not necessarily in a good way. I think that the majority of the league is starting to devalue first baseman. We have seen Pete Alonso kind of struggle to get the contract he wanted in free agency. It's an interesting situation. I think most teams view this kind of now as the place to stash somebody who doesn't really have a home. And that's why you see somebody like even Luis Arias getting time at first base for the Padres. Um, Jake Cronenworth before him. The Padres just have all shortstops. Um, but the Orioles have two guys who are virtually dedicated to that position, which is a really unique situation. We are, of course, talking about the Ryans. I'm going to spend some time today talking about what can work and what is kind of weird and irritating about the situation. We've alluded to it before on the podcast, but before I get into that, as always, want to thank the sponsor of our show. BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for betting on all the madness. Whether you're a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from college basketball to a $200,000 bracket contest. BetOnline continues to be your number one sports betting source. From every Cinderella story to every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more for every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. The thing that I do want to do before I get too far into this is just mention the fact that obviously Jesse and I are brothers. Our family just last night lost somebody very close to us, one of my dad's best friends. I want to take this time to remind everyone, including myself, to reach out to the people you love, tell them you love them, text that friend you haven't talked to in a while. Um, it can all be gone very quickly, so just reminder on all fronts, check in on your people, take care of them, and make sure they know you love them. It's very simple and it makes everyone's life better. So let's get into it. We are here to talk about Ryan's, plural. Uh, I have up on my screen in front of me Ryan Mountcastle, and then I have Ryan O'Hearn. I think that, largely like these guys are both productive MLB players. There's no reason to look at either one of them and say, man, this guy does not belong in a major league lineup. But there are reasons to say that neither one of them should be, an everyday guy, so to speak. I'm realizing that I didn't pull up Mountcastle's uh, splits, but he had very, very, very distinct splits right versus left last year. Actually was slightly below league average against right-handed pitchers. Scroll down a little bit. Yeah, 98 WRC plus against right-handed pitchers last year. Obviously very, very strong against lefties. Um, he has actually had, if I remember correctly, some reverse splits in the past. So, not to say that this is exactly how it's going to shake out this year. He might not be exactly the same player with such distinct splits, but it does say something that, your first baseman, this position that is supposed to just be a constant source of offensive production, the guy that you would normally plug in just does not hit right-handed pitching even at a league average level. That's pretty concerning. Um, but that's why we have Ryan O'Hearn. And if I do the exact same thing for O'Hearn, who clearly does not hit left-handed pitching well, see, this is why I should do these things ahead of time. um, yeah, if you do the same thing for Ryan O'Hearn, he was 25% worse than league average against lefties, 23% better against righties. So this is how we've ended up with what is, for all intents and purposes, a platoon. I think that Ryan Mountcastle got more runway against righties than O'Hearn did against lefties last year. Clearly, you know, at least Mountcastle was about league average, but I think that that's not going to be the case this year. I think that we're going to find ourselves in a position where, because we have, three outfielders who are left-handed bats and we have Tyler O'Neill, I think one of those four is going to take the DH position pretty much any time a righty is on the mound, and then we have Adley to consider as well um, for the DH spot. I don't see Ryan Mountcastle getting as much time against righties this year purely because of how the roster is set up. I would rather have Heston Kjerstad face a right-handed pitcher any day of the week. So, you have these two guys, and I guess against, before I say that, against a lefty, kind of the same thing happens. Like we have Ramon Laureano, we have um, Tyler O'Neill, we have Adley, we have Gary Sanchez. We've got a bunch of right-handed bats that are going to slot into the lineup, and these lefties will have to come out. So I think you end up with what could very, very likely end up as a very, very strict platoon at first base between Mountcastle against lefties and O'Hearn against righties. Now, the place where this gets very weird and unlike pretty much anywhere else in the league is now you're committing, you know, uh, both of these guys are making $8 million this year, if I remember right, somewhere in that range. And so you're committing $16 million to lock down two roster spots, but only really fill one position. Um, in the modern age, like teams will spend a lot of time thinking about roster construction, and one of the most valuable things is flexibility. So we have pretty significant, financial investment here, but more importantly, we're investing two roster spots. Um, and that's a really interesting setup, and really limits the flexibility um, that you could have with some kind of utility infielders if you want to cycle someone in, cycle someone out. Um, it's a weird setup, particularly with how the game is moving toward, these platoons being more geared towards, I guess, let's say lower cost people. You don't usually invest big money in somebody who's going to be just a platoon. And so the fact that we have, solid money, like clearly it's below market rate still. You, uh, Again, market rate, if you were getting these guys in free agency, is somewhere around like $8.5 million for one WAR is typically what people are paying. So both these guys are going to be worth more than one WAR. But when you have these strict platoon setups, usually it's younger guys that are pre-arbitration on the major league minimum, basically, and you don't see it very often with somewhat veteran guys, with rising costs. So the Orioles are in a weird position, but at the same time, it could work. Like I did show you, like Mountcastle was 34% better against lefties, O'Hearn 23% better than league average against righties. Um, you know, 812 OPS, 777 OPS. These guys are good. And if you look at the Baseball Savant page, there's a lot of red, very simply. Um, I think that the reasons you can be concerned about, uh, I guess, about Mountcastle in particular, I think is, there have been trends over the last couple years, and this is a good time to plug some new stuff from Baseball Savant on batted ball profiles. They've added a couple things here, but I think the thing that's maybe most notable is Ryan Mountcastle's oppo ground ball percentage was the highest of his career last year at 7.7%. He has not been pulling fly balls in the air, which is pretty universally understood to be the most valuable type of hit, so to speak. Um, I think I would be remiss if I didn't go ahead and admit that yes, the wall might have played some psychological effect. He certainly claims it has. Um, but, you know, back when he was hitting 30 home runs, we see he was pulling the ball in the air 20% of the time. And last year, it was less than half of that at 10.1. I should say 20.5% for those of you listening to the audio version of this, but pulled the ball 20.5% of the time in the air in 2021, and in 2024, 10.1% of the time. So less than half. That uh, that pulled ball in the air rate was the lowest of his career, still 4.5% lower than his career average. It's very like he has been basically building these pretty bad habits, where he goes ahead and is just kind of trying to poke the ball the other way. And again, you think of what you want out of a first baseman. It's somebody doing damage, somebody really going ahead and, I mean, putting a hurt on people. And the thing that I think you have to notice is he hit 13 home runs last year. It's really, you know, he did not get the full season's worth of plate appearances. Granted, he had the concussion, all sorts of stuff, um, or vertigo, I'm sorry. But he still got 500 plate appearances, 473 at bats. This guy was not like lacking opportunities. He definitely was not, you know, doing damage, hitting home runs. So it's a very interesting situation with him. You have to be a little bit hesitant. Can he fully revamp the way that he attacks the ball, his entire approach? Can he do that over one off season? It's certainly possible, but the wall was there for years and these habits get ingrained. So if if you cannot expect some sort of reasonable like shift back to the mean, you know, back toward being able to pull the ball in the air, then I think you have to be a little bit concerned about what Ryan Mountcastle is going to bring to the table this year. Um, I guess the other thing about that, I do think that it's worth noting, he chases at pretty high rates. The league average chase rate is 28.5%. Mountcastle chases at a 38% rate, 10% more than league average. Um, he makes contact only about at a league average rate, maybe 1% more than league average on pitches outside of the zone. And so this is a guy who you're kind of building this profile and you say, okay, well, he chases a lot of pitches out of the zone. He doesn't necessarily have the bat to ball skills to hit balls out of the zone better than anyone else. And when he is making contact, it's this kind of weak, non-damage inducing kind of contact. He is just poking the ball the other way. Um, and yeah, that's very concerning. I think at the same time, if we take a step back and we stop getting into the nitty gritty of these numbers and you just say, all right, well, let's go ahead and just look. The fact of the matter is he still hits the ball very hard. He still has pretty phenomenal bat speed. He averages over 75 miles an hour, which is that threshold for what's called a fast swing, or what's deemed a fast swing by Baseball Savant. Um, he, hits the ball at solid launch angles. He by and large, really does go ahead and impact the baseball. It's just in the wrong direction. And that is very much an approach thing. That is very much a, something that could be influenced by the presence of the wall and could change this year. But at the same time, you need to see that because we need a little more power production. If this team wants to go and win a World Series, like 13 home runs out of a first baseman is just not really what you want to see. Ryan O'Hearn had 15, so I guess that accounts for 28. That's probably about league average for what the first base position will provide for a team. But if you once again consider that we have to invest two roster spots to get that kind of value, that's where it starts to be concerning. So Ryan Mountcastle, he's an interesting guy. Obviously, he's a super fun character. People clearly love having him around. He's somebody that, connected really well with the young guys. You see all these pictures of him, Adley, Cowser, Gunnar hanging out on the beach during spring training, that is. So clearly he's somebody we want around. I think. I'm not trying to, I've advocated in the past for shipping him out and trying to, you know, basically allocate the value we have in him to a more useful spot, starting rotation, hint, hint. But he's not the worst. I guess that's the biggest thing to say. I think that, the things you really need to look at and be concerned about are the amount that he chases, the amount that he strikes out, the amount that he does not walk. He is fully reliant on the quality of his contact and doing damage when he makes contact with the ball. Um, and because he's so reliant on that, having this batted ball profile that is not really optimized for doing damage, that's when you start to get concerned a little bit. That said, clearly he's still, a productive player. He is a better than major league average hitter. Um, and he belongs on a team. I'm not trying to say that the Orioles are like just holding on to some hope of what he was when we drafted him in the first round, and he doesn't deserve to be here at all. I'm not going that far, of course. Um, he's fine. He's fine. And given the strength of the rest of our lineup too, I think you know like first base being, I don't want to say one of our weaker positions, but just kind of a middling offensive position for the Orioles is unique to the O's, I think, because usually your first basemen are banging. But I think that that's not necessarily the worst thing. We still have above league average production. And, if you do have a strict platoon, you're going to end up somewhere in that 30% better than league average rate, which is better than major league average production, even for a first baseman, of course. Um, so you can expect that this will still contribute value as it's currently configured. And we have Adley Rutschman, we have Gunnar Henderson, we have, this phenomenal outfield set that's going to do a ton of damage, a full season of Jordan Westberg, hopefully. The rest of the lineup, as it shapes up around them, is going to be just fine. Um, so interesting from Mountcastle there. I guess turning over to our other Ryan, uh, this guy really, yeah. I mean, I mentioned it previously. This guy cannot hit left-handed pitching at all. It's kind of astounding. Um, OBP against lefties under 300, slugging just above 300. It's kind of interesting. His average is almost exactly the same, 262 against lefties, 264 against righties, but he clearly just sees the ball so much better and does so much more damage against righties than he does against lefties. The slugging is a 40-point difference, or I'm sorry, the on base percentage is a 40-point difference. Slugging percentage is a 120-point difference. OPS as a whole, 170-point difference. So clearly he's much, much better um, against right-handed pitching. Uh, and yeah, O'Hearn's interesting. Like we keep trying this outfield experiment with him, but he really does not. He just doesn't have the juice to be an outfielder. uh, I respect him for being willing to do it. It's just not good though. So what we can look at, he, I mean, he's a really, really professional hitter, I guess is the best thing to say. For a guy who can impact the ball, you see expected slugging percentage is in the 82nd percentile, better than four of five guys. Um, he only strikes out 14% of the time, which is really fascinating. I think he is maybe one of the best success stories for the Orioles in terms of, having a set approach, being disciplined at the plate, finding your pitches. I mean, O'Hearn was a guy who always could hit the ball kind of hard and just had no approach, struck out all the time when he was with Kansas City, and he's a very fundamentally different hitter with us. So you see, I mean, he doesn't have the bat speed that Mountcastle does. He's just barely above league average. He does not have, the hard hit rates. He doesn't have any of that. But for the bat speed that he has, he maximizes it more often. His squared up percentage is great. Again, he does not chase. He really doesn't swing and miss even. Um, whiff percentage, excuse me, is only 18% of the time better than, 4 out of 5 major leaguers. This is a guy who's got a really, like pretty cohesive and well polished offensive arsenal. And if we go and look at the same batted ball profile metric we were looking at with O'Hearn or with Mountcastle, I'm sorry, you can see, those oppo ground balls, he does it significantly less than major league average, 3/4 of the time that the major league average player does. Um, Pulling in the air is also slightly less than league average, but um, he is able to get the ball in the air more effectively than most, and he, yeah, in doing so and in not giving away free outs with strikeouts, he puts himself in a good position to succeed. Um, Mountcastle ultimately, you know, had a worse OPS last year, but Mountcastle can probably hit the ball a little harder. That again speaks to like the on-base skills that O'Hearn has, the lack of strikeouts that O'Hearn has, um, and in that way, he's a very very valuable piece. I was kind of surprised that the Orioles have kept him this far. Again, this is $8 million or so, which is a it's not a exorbitant cost, but it's an investment of money. You think you got to have 26 guys on the team. If every one of them is making $8 million, you're at a $288 million payroll. So that is you're paying him a good chunk of money, uh, like over the luxury tax if you extrapolate that out. So I think that having that for somebody who is the strong side of a platoon is fine. Again, it's just interesting. Um, but yeah, the Orioles are putting together this like the platoon should be strong. I think it's the best thing to say. If you can project Mountcastle to start pulling the ball like we saw the other day, where he, cleared the berm at spring training. Um, if you can count on that a little bit, you can really project, this position in the lineup to maybe be 30% better than league average, um, even if it isn't the most efficient allocation of your roster spots. And that's an interesting thing, and like that sounds really good because the only people who were better than 30% of the league last year on this team were, I mean, it probably was just Gunner as a matter of fact. So, um, you have to feel pretty good about that. You have to think that this will be a really productive spot in the order, even if it is configured in this weird way. Um, Now, I think the thing that makes this spot particularly interesting is you have this horribly inefficient allocation of resources, to use the big words, but you are doing so, and at the same time, you are blocking Kobe Mayo. And now, I readily admit that Kobe Mayo was not good last year. He really struggled in the major leagues, but I just want to reiterate, this guy has nothing to learn at AAA anymore. Um, he had 25 bombs in 358 plate appearances. If you draw that out to 600, that's a 40 home run season. He hit 293 on base of 372. His OPS was over 960 last year in AAA. He's really just like, he's frankly too good for AAA. Um, and in creating this platoon with Mountcastle and O'Hearn, you are eating up another roster spot that Kobe Mayo cannot have. If you are gonna pay Ryan Mountcastle $8 million to just be the weak side of a platoon and just come hit lefties, Kobe Mayo can probably do that. He's gonna be making the major league minimum, 700 some $1,000, and he will definitely do it at he'll produce as much value as Mountcastle on a rate basis, per that money very, very easily. Um, and again, it'd be like kind of a gentle situation to bring him into where he only has to hit against left-handed pitching. You put him in these favorable spots, you let him work out the kinks a little bit. I think that, you know, part of my thinking throughout the entire season was Kobe Mayo is ready. He has nothing to learn in the minors. We can trade Ryan Mountcastle, slot Kobe Mayo into that position. You save a couple dollars that you can spend elsewhere. I'm not just trying to save money. I don't care about David Rubenstein's money, but assuming we have a fixed amount of money we can spend, you know, you save a couple dollars that you can go ahead and you can reallocate somewhere else. You can bring in, a starting pitcher of a Ra- Ryan Mountcastle value. Um, and you can plug Kobe Mayo in and you'll be in great shape. Um, Clearly that didn't happen. I'm not totally broken up that it didn't happen. Mayo has struggled a little bit in spring training. He has started to turn it on. I've got the Blue Jays game up in the corner right here, but um, I should say I'm recording this on Thursday, so the Blue Jays game there. But he has been turning it on in spring training a little bit. He roped a double today. He started looking much, much better, hitting the ball well over 100 miles an hour. Um, so hopefully he's gaining some confidence. I think the trade deadline will roll around at some point, and I think that this is very easily a place that we could see some sort of movement. I think, Ryan Mountcastle, there can't be a world where Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo are both in the Orioles organization next year. That just fundamentally doesn't make sense. Um, I think that Ryan Mountcastle is the one who he's a free agent after next season, not after this season, but after next season. Um, Kobe Mayo you'll have for a full 6 years. So it seems very easy which one you would want to get rid of. One of them also costs more money than the other. So it seems like, this may be our last run with Ryan Mountcastle, just reading tea leaves. Uh, I'm not one to say that he needs to be gone. I'm not one to say that he, uh, is a detriment to the team or anything, but there are signs that he will likely be the one. And, you have to think he could bring back some really nice value in terms of what, the Orioles could acquire in terms of a starting pitcher, or some bullpen help at the deadline. Mountcastle is a solid major league player. Teams will be interested, and again, he's still sort of below market rate because he is, um, under arbitration right now and controlled for this year and next. So we'll see how it goes. I am pretty, although I'm like I think it's weird. I don't like quite understand why Elias and Hyde went this route. I think it will be effective. I think that the first base position is going to be a good one for the Orioles. I think we will be top 10 in the league in terms of production. We will have just invested a lot of our roster and a good chunk of money in order to get there. And first base just isn't a place you usually do that these days. But again, that's fine. It's invest what you need to produce value to win ball games. I am not against doing something inefficiently if it has a good result, and you have to expect that this will. Um, Very much hope to see both of these guys doing their thing. I hope to not see them in lineups against same-handed pitchers. I think that you need to just embrace that Ryan Mountcastle will hit lefties extremely well and might not do that great against righties, and stop trying to force a square peg into a circular hole. Um, we'll see how it goes. Yeah, I am I am cautiously optimistic, I guess is the last thing to say. I feel good about it. I think that the O's are going to be a great team this year. We will um, certainly not be lacking for offense. And so even if Ryan Mountcastle gets too many plate appearances against right-handed pitching, um, I think that, the Gunnar Hendersons of the world will certainly offset performance against right-handed pitching. Uh, we're going to be good. First base is an offensive-minded position. I'm not even going to bother talking about defensive value. I think it's not an important thing at first base. Both these guys were around league average. I think O'Hearn's fielding run value was hurt by his time in the outfield. He is primarily a first baseman, but he was slightly worse than league average in terms of overall value in the field. Ryan Mountcastle is slightly above league average. they're fine. Mountie was a borderline Gold Glover. I think he was a Gold Glove finalist, if I remember correctly. Um, Even though, again, Gold Gloves really mean nothing. They are a sham of an award, and I've stopped respecting them completely. But Mountcastle has shown good defensive value in the past. I just don't really care about first base defensive value. Fact of the matter is, you can stick somebody over there and they will play it fine, and it's not going to be too much of a detriment to your team. If you have somebody who's worse than league average at first base, they can still catch the ball. That is a capability that all major leaguers have, just actually catching a ball thrown by somebody else. So I have a lot of confidence that even a replacement level player would be able to catch the ball. And that is what you need a first baseman to do above anything. All that said, feeling good about first base. It's a unique setup, but if they both come in and they both mash, you really cannot complain. You cannot be upset about it. Um, and we'll roll with it. I think that we'll see. Yeah, I think that the fact that we have these three left-handed hitting outfielders, you're going to want them in against righties every single time, and we are paying Tyler O'Neill more money than we're paying Ryan Mountcastle. So you want Tyler O'Neill in the lineup against righties and lefties. I think that just pushes Ryan Mountcastle. Assume Tyler O'Neill is at DH. You assume Ryan O'Hearn is playing first base. Then there is nowhere for Ryan Mountcastle to be in a lineup against a righty. I think that's fine, but I do expect him to get fewer plate appearances than last year, and I do expect him to uh, produce a little bit better because he'll only be in those favorable matchups against lefties. So it'll be good. It'll be good. I am vamping a little bit, so I'm gonna wrap it up before I completely and totally lose any sense of cohesion and coherence. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name's Elijah. As always, if you could be so kind, subscribe to us, rate the podcast, follow, comment, like let us know how we're doing, let others know how we're doing as long as we're doing it well. If you think we're not doing it well, come talk to me. Email us thewarehousepod@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Blue Sky at the Warehouse Pod. We are in all of the places and we love to hear from you, love to chat. So reach out sometime soon. And yeah, we'll catch up with you guys next time. This has been the Warehouse Podcast. My name's Elijah. Go O's.